Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Diane Baden, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. We are pleased to present this webinar in our series on RDA, Resource Description and Access. Our presenter today is Paige G. Andrew, MAPS Cataloging Librarian and a member of the MAPS Cataloging Team, Cataloging and Metadata Services Department, Pennsylvania State University Libraries. Paige is the author of Cataloging Sheet Maps, The Basics, as well as other publications on issues related to cartographic materials cataloging. During the webinar, if you have questions for Paige, please type them into the question box on your screen. Paige will leave time at the end to respond to as many questions as possible. Please note that we are recording the presentation and you will receive an email shortly after the conclusion of the webinar with a copy of the slides and link to the recording. And now I will turn the program over to Paige. There will be a slight pause as we change presenters.
Thank you, Diane. And a quick comment about the questions and answer period at the end. I'll freely admit right now that I might have to answer I don't know, and something about possibly that I might have to look up something to confirm it. So, good morning to those of you tuning in from the West Coast, where I hail from, and good afternoon to the rest of you. I am coming to you from State College in the heart of central Pennsylvania. Thank you for attending a presentation that I hope will bring the creation of bibliographic records for cartographic materials using RDA into better focus. And speaking of focus, I received a suggestion that I am following through on. Some of you attending this presentation know me well. Some of you know me, and perhaps a number of you don't. So, by way of introduction, here's a picture of me in yearbook style, you might say, though I'll admit there's more gray in the beard there now. And here is one of me in a less stressful setting. You can't see the bald spot in the back of my head in either picture, but it is there and it's getting bigger as my boys grow into young men, and perhaps it's caused in part by my now dealing with learning a third cataloging standard in my career. I've prepared today's presentation for an audience who has experience, long or short, with AACR2, and will be making some comparisons between the old standard and this new one. If you happen to be a cataloger new to the profession, learning to use RDA without the baggage, if you will, of AACR2, then you're probably way ahead of me. Let me assure you at the start that I am certainly not yet comfortable with RDA and the principles behind it, such as FRBR. I'm betting most of you are at the same stage, learning the details as you go and beginning to apply them. My personal learning curve is still a long one. At the same time, I have immersed myself in recent months into RDA, along with my fellow Penn State colleagues, both through watching various webinars and attending meetings at conferences, and likely you have too. I have also tried my hand at creating a few records for maps in our collection using this new standard. And I must say that the transition at the field level is not that bad. So, please do not hold me to an expert level by any means. Like you, I'm still learning. That said, I'm happy to be able to share my knowledge about some basics of RDA as they apply to both materials of all kinds and also cartographic materials, specifically sheet maps. And since we are on an exciting journey together, a new route if you will, I thought it would be helpful to put up some guideposts so you know what is forthcoming. In other words, what will we focus on today? The meat of this presentation will be primarily on descriptive changes as they appear in the bibliographic record at the manifestation level, both for all types of materials and for maps. So that means we will spend most of our time looking at RDA Section 1, Recording Attributes of Manifestation and Item, specifically chapters 1, 2, 3, and Section 2, recording attributes of work and expression, which includes part of Chapter 7 and a bit of Chapter 6, plus a couple of the appendices in RDA. Given the limited amount of time, I will barely be scratching the surface of RDA and its related principles. Of course, I must touch on some background things such as the FRBR Group 1 entities, though I trust you have all digested much of this in recent months, so I will not dwell on it. I will also share some new concepts and terminology, and then show you specific record level changes as they apply to all resources, and finally, those related to cartographic materials. So, let's get started. You may already have pondered the big question, why replace AACR2 with RDA? But let me touch on this in order to put the big picture into perspective. As noted in RDA 0.1, quote, RDA provides a flexible and extensible framework for the description of resources produced and disseminated using digital technologies, while also serving the needs of agencies organizing resources produced in non-digital formats. The focus is on digital technologies and information, and thus, by inference, AACR2 has basically been deemed a non-supportive standard for these and other future resources. Two other key aims of RDA are supplied in Instruction 0.0. The first is to support our users in the 4 tasks of find, identify, select, and obtain, and in the real world to simultaneously support our fellow professionals who are supporting our users in these tasks. The second is to describe an entity associated with a resource through find, identify, clarify, and understand activities. Here we are talking about what we know as headings for such things as persons, families, and corporate bodies. Therefore, the activity of cataloging or creating records using RDA and its guiding principles will share information about and/or lead a user to a desired resource. Allow me to highlight just a couple of new concepts we will all become familiar with, or actually re-familiar with, while using RDA. The first of these has to do with transcribing information from the resource as opposed to supplying information, something we all do using AACR2, but is refocused in RDA. What is known as the principle of representation, found in 0.4.3.4, or in other words, take what you see, means more transcription and less supplying. As shared in Chris Oliver's book, Introducing RDA, A Guide to the Basics, which I highly recommend, she notes several positive outcomes to this change. Simplifying the cataloging process, with fewer exceptions to worry about, changing how we handle abbreviations and inaccuracies, allowing for further automation of data capture and reuse, and streamlining workflows. I would surmise also that this change further assists the internationalization of our records. This change in particular impacts abbreviating words. So if you remember, take what you see, then you'll always be on the right path. Another not so new concept is something that is central to the structure of RDA, and that is the idea of core, and then necessarily core if. This concept provides a base or minimum level description that allows for the flexibility and extensibility mentioned in Instruction 0.1. Core elements are explicitly identified throughout RDA and given with the instructions, such as that for 2.3 for title. The core elements for all areas of the record are collocated within Instruction 1.3, but also in a very handy table created by the Library of Congress for the RDA test project called LC RDA Elements for the RDA Test, combination of RDA Core and RDA Core If elements plus additional elements that can be found at the link shown on this slide. Let me also point you to a very useful read titled RDA Core Elements and FRBR User Tasks, created by the GASC in 2008. So, let's keep in mind that along the way we must provide those elements that are tagged as core and core if elements when they apply. Let's stop here for a moment and look at a few terms that may be new to some of you. An access point is what we think of as a heading in AACR2, be it main entry, added entry, or a subject heading. A key difference in RDA is that these access points now reflect relationships. Relationships between the Group 1 entities, relationships between creators, etc. And speaking of creators, a creator is a person, family, or corporate body responsible for the creation of a work. In the case of cartographic materials, most creators are identified as corporate bodies rather than as persons. However, a person who is a creator of a map might be identified as a cartographer, for example. A carrier is defined as a physical medium in which data, sound, images, and so on are stored. For a sheet map, the carrier would be the sheet of paper, or a similar material such as silk or wood, on which the cartographic image and other information is displayed. And finally, LCPS stands for Library of Congress Policy Statements. These are similar in nature to what we know as Library of Congress rule interpretations when working with AACR2. In other words, further explanations of the RDA instructions along with how LC has decided to apply these instructions. They are found as embedded links within the instructions as a logo with the word LCPS in it, and also under the Resources tab on the table of contents for the RDA toolkit. In addition, you will find a list of terms and their definitions provided at Instruction 1.1 Terminology, all falling within the term Mode of Issuance. I did say that I would touch on FRBR a bit, didn't I? Well, let's get that over with now. Functional requirements for bibliographic records, or FRBR, is all about relationships. Relationships between ideas, things, and people, however you want to define that. RDA is based on FRBR and similar models. Therefore, FRBR, FRAD, and others are known as entity relationship models. The models also express relationships between the data and user tasks. In fact, you might note that in RDA, 6 out of the 10 sections are devoted to recording relationships. When we conclude today's presentation, I will highlight some instances of these relationships as they appear within a bibliographic record. And let me also note that what I will soon share about record-level information and examples is aimed primarily at the manifestation level of FRBR. So here are the 4 Group 1 entities along with their formal definitions that you need to know in order to make sense of the arrangement and use of RDA. I have grown to call these WEMEs for short. Okay, let's jump right into specific changes within bibliographic records as they apply to all materials and follow with those that apply to cartographic materials. If you have a good grasp of these already, good for you. First, let's look at some broad level changes that apply to all resources. The rule of 3, abbreviations, the new 33X fields, relationship designators, and punctuation conventions. All of these do apply to cartographic materials as well. Starting with the rule of 3, according to Rule 1.1F5 in AACR2, if there are more than 3 persons or bodies that perform the same function, or with the same degree of responsibility, then we only supply the first of each group, followed by the mark of omission, and et al. In square brackets. Since a cornerstone of RDA is identifying relationships, this restriction of the rule of 3 has been lifted, and we are free to provide as many access points for creators as we wish. This first slide shows a group of persons responsible for the resource, highlighted in red, and the AACR2 example showing the use of et al., while the RDA example follows instruction 2.4.1.5, statement naming more than one person. Note that instruction 2.4 in RDA says that we must provide a statement of responsibility relating to a title proper, if there is one, as it is one of the core elements. But if you are cataloging at a core level, only the first recorded is required, though most of us will go beyond this expectation. This next slide shows a mix of responsible parties. In Instruction 2.4.2.1, the scope statement tells us that, quote, any persons, families, or corporate bodies responsible for the creation of or contributing to the realization of the intellectual or artistic content of the resource, unquote, may be recorded. And Instruction 2.4.1.6, more than one statement of responsibility, also allows for all creators to be given in the statement of responsibility. The first named of any of these, or the authorized access point, goes into a 1XX field, and then you can provide the name of one or more other creators in 7XX fields. These are known as variant access points. So, this is an example taken from the persons shown in the previous slide. Let me show you a map example at this point, borrowed and edited from an actual record, showing the change to the rule of 3. At the top is the AACR2 situation with the first person named, Richard Talbert, followed by et al., then the first person of the second group, Carrie Barber, also followed by et al. Note in the RDA example, all individuals who are involved are provided. Then at the bottom of the slide, Mr. Talbert is the authorized access point in a 100 field, while all other individuals involved go into separate 700 fields. Moving on to abbreviations, let's look at this aspect in two parts. First, as it applies to those Roman abbreviations we now use with square brackets in the publication distribution area, and then more broadly in other forms of words. This first slide covers the change in use of sine loco, or SL, and sine nomo, or SN. RDA Instruction 2.8.2.6 says, quote, if neither a known or a probable local place or country, state, or province, etc. of publication can be determined, record the phrase place of publication not identified using square brackets. Likewise, in Instruction 2.8.4.7, for a resource in a published form, if no publisher is named within the resource itself, and the publisher cannot be identified from other sources as specified in 2.2.4, record the phrase publisher not identified, unquote, in square brackets. This slide shows comparative examples of both of these changes. By the way, in cases where you cannot identify a date of publication by any means, we are to record the phrase date of publication not identified. For information about when to use square brackets, see Instruction 2.2.4 and the LCPS, other sources of information associated with it. Generally speaking, in other areas of the record, words that catalogers have commonly abbreviated using AACR2, such as illustration or color, are now to be spelled out in order to better meet their user requirements of find, identify, select, and obtain. Appendix B4 says, quote, for transcribed elements, use only those abbreviations found in the sources of information for the element. If supplying all or part of a transcribed element, generally do not abbreviate words. However, Appendix B does provide for specific instances where transcribed words are still allowed to be abbreviated, such as in B5, where each item starts, quote, use abbreviations prescribed in B7, and so forth. I will return to this with some map examples shortly. I don't know about you, but I am still struggling with the details related to these new 3.3x fields. To provide some context, in AACR2, the General Material Designator, or GMD, is used to segregate items into categories using specific labels and provided as part of the title information. Then, the Specific Material Designator, or SMD, in 300 subfield A provides more specificity, though not often enough. In RDA, this idea has been broken out into 3 new fields, both to provide better levels of specificity and to enhance our resource descriptions for use in other content schemas. Note that these fields are repeatable and that what goes into them are from a controlled vocabulary. The fields are the 336 field for content type, and the RDA instructions are found in 6.9. The 337 for media type, with the instructions found in 3.2, and the 338 for carrier type, and its instructions is found in 3.3. And note also that 2 of these are core elements. This and the following tables are found in the online document RDA and MARC, located at the MARC 21 homepage, and are a handy visual guide for which specific terms to include in each of the fields, the codes to provide in subfield B, and it explicitly tells one the source code that goes into subfield 2. In all 3 tables, I have provided only those related to a variety of cartographic items, with a focus on the most common types. First, in this table for the 336 field, cartographic image would apply to sheet maps or atlases, cartographic 3-dimensional form for globes, and cartographic datasets for GIS and similar cartographic data. In this table for media type, once again I've highlighted the more common cartographic materials. So we would use unmediated for maps, atlases, and the like that do not require some kind of equipment to view, microform for maps found on microfiche, and computer for any digital cartographic items. Finally, in this 3rd table for carrier type, you will find that it is one of several tables in RDA and MARC related to carriers. So I've only grabbed the one most applicable to cartographic materials. Here, sheet applies to maps, volume applies to atlases, and object applies to globes. Once again, these fields are repeatable, so it is possible to use multiples whenever you need to. I thought I would provide you with a means for remembering what goes where for these 3x fields. Generally speaking, the 336 field for content type answers the question of, what is it? The media type answers the question of, how is it stored? And the carrier type answers the question, where is it stored? Finally, here's a look at how these fields appear together to describe a sheet map. And, for comparison, how the data in these fields is changed to represent a GIS data set found on a computer. You'll note especially the change in subfield A for each of these. In each case, it was a matter of going to the separate tables and pulling the appropriate term in the list, then also identifying the coded form of that term which goes into subfield B. This mix and match process is awkward at first, but in time I'm sure I will get comfortable for a standard set to mean a sheet map and so forth, just as I did in learning the code strings that go into the 007 for maps. Moving on to relationship designators, which I only want to touch on briefly. Relationship designators have been around for quite a while and are used most frequently in some formats of materials, such as music, than others. Information about the use of relationship designators is found in RDA appendices I, J, K, and L, and I recommend reviewing the scope statements at the beginning of each appendix for guidance on how and when to use these. Here I've provided a few of the common designators that we see associated with the creators of cartographic resources. These tags, if you will, are most usually found in a statement of responsibility, but designator terms are applied with the access point in subfield E, as shown in the example for the famous Irwin Royce. Must we provide these designators in our descriptions? The short answer is no. That said, it may be wise for each cataloging community to decide when to use or not use relationship designators in access points. For instance, those of us in the cartographic cataloging community may need to discuss whether to apply a designator term such as cartographer to an authorized access point for a person, and under what circumstances. And wrapping up this section on general changes, let's look at punctuation conventions. All of us, I'm sure, have wondered about, and most of us probably have even asked whether RDA will bring with it a set of punctuation conventions that differ from the ISBD standard. In fact, RDA is not wedded to a specific set of punctuation conventions, or as it is called in Appendix D, record syntaxes. However, Appendix D does provide, quote, guidelines on the presentation of data in accordance with ISBD specifications, unquote, with a table showing these at the element level, along with the related instruction in RDA. Suffice it to say that because the ISBD standard has been consistently used for many years by catalogers within the library community, it will likely continue to be used. Other communities may wish to apply their own conventions regarding punctuation to fit what is a best need or is most well known to their audiences. So let's move on to looking at how some of the record level changes I have provided relate specifically to cartographic materials. I will focus primarily on two areas. The mathematical data elements is found in mark field 255, and the physical description elements is found in mark field 300. In RDA, the two primary changes in the mathematical data area are not using square brackets for supplied data and no longer abbreviating the word approximately. And the changes involving the physical description area focus on abbreviations, again, and the fact that metric symbols are not abbreviations. Instructions related to mathematical data are found in Chapter 7 of RDA, describing content. And in particular, instruction 7.25 is for recording scale statements, 7.26 is for recording projection statements, and 7.4 is for recording coordinates. As you can see, I have also included which subfields the individual elements go into. If you compare 7.25.1.3 to Rule 3.3 in AACR2, you will find that they are nearly identical, except for three things. Square brackets are not used. The use of the word scale to start the scale statement is not explicit in RDA, and CA period is gone. When reviewing all of the instructions found in 7.25 relating to scale, you will not find in either the instructions or in the accompanying illustrations a set of square brackets used. When we are following AACR2, we employ a set of square brackets in those circumstances where the scale is not provided in its representative fraction form, as it must. And those instances are either when we convert a verbal scale statement into a representative fraction, or when we pick up a natural scale indicator and take a measurement along a bar graph using that tool to determine a representative fraction. Also in 7.25, you will note that it explicitly says to record the word approximately in its spelled out form. The reason behind this change mostly goes back to the fact that RDA was created as an international standard, and therefore it is more clearly understood when we use the spelled out form of the word, and likely more translatable, rather than using either an abbreviated form or a symbol for it. This slide shows a side-by-side comparison of the changes to square brackets and the use of the spelled out approximately that I just summarized for you. One other bit of information that is not a change, except that in AACR2 there is an explicit instruction in Rule 3.3b1, while in RDA it is implied. That is, we continue to begin the scale statement with the word scale to indicate to our patrons what the data is about. Finally, here is a slide to show further how abbreviations are used with transcribed elements in the 255 field at the top and as part of the additional scale information area at the bottom. Let's move on to changes regarding data elements that appear in mark field 300 for cartographic materials. The instructions for recording these data elements are found in chapters 3 and 7 of RDA. And the nice thing is that instructions for cartographic resources are separated out from the general instructions at the beginning of each chapter for other resources. In reality, the changes between the two standards are pretty minor, as you might see with the map example that I've provided. Again, there are two primary changes to be aware of when recording data for the physical description elements. The first goes back to the issue of abbreviations, while the second, though closely related, regards the symbol cm to represent the words centimeter or centimeters. As you can see in this first slide, we are used to abbreviating the word color in either its American or English spelling as COL period. And in RDA we are now to spell out this word. Let me note that I struggled at first with what to use here in the 300 subfield B, color or colored. There is a distinct difference between the two words, which was recently shared with me, so do be careful about what you put in your record. The word color means that the map was printed using two or more colors, while the word colored means that one or more colors were applied to the map after it was created, either as a manuscript or through a printing process, as in a map that was hand-colored. Be aware, also, that other words that we are used to abbreviating in the 300 field must now be spelled out, such as diameter. In this second slide, you will note that I share where to find the RDA instructions for extent and a portion of what is known in AACR2 as other physical details. And as a reminder, in the dimensions area, or 300 subfield C, each dimension set is followed by cm without a period, the exception being when this is the last word in the string, in which case the period specifies the end of the string, not that this word is an abbreviation. As previously noted, B51 specifically notes that, quote, metric symbols are not abbreviations. Such symbols are not followed by a full stop, end quote. And just a quick note that information regarding supplying whether a cartographic image is in color is not found in Chapter 3 of RDA with the other usual other physical detail elements, but instead are located in Chapter 7, because this data applies to the expression of a work. Now let's put everything together and see what an RDA-based record for a simple monographic sheet map might look like, with the changes noted. The bibliographic record created for a general map of Sussex County, New Jersey, in this case shows those words highlighted in red that would have been abbreviated using AACR2, approximately, and illustrations. Also, the metric symbols for cm without the period, and of course the new 33x fields that tell us collectively that this is a sheet map. And here's the same record with the RDA instructions for each of these changes indicated. Note that I have also shown the new code in the descriptive cataloging form fixed field, which is code I, and subfield E with the code RDA in the 040 field to show that the record was created using our resource description and access instructions. Here is another record, this one showing the rule of 3, though in this case responsibility is provided in two places, the 245 subfield C and in a note, rightly or wrongly. And yet again, the unabbreviated words, the metric symbol of cm in the 300 field, and the new 33x fields. And finally, a look at descriptive elements for a third map record highlighting the entities of work, expression, manifestation, and item in association with their given fields. This wraps up what I wanted to share with you today, even though there is so much more detail that could be provided. But let me leave you with a few thoughts. At a minimum, I hope what I have shared today provides some needed RDA explanations and some clarification and focus on record level changes. Additionally, I hope I have given you a measure of confidence so you are ready to try your hand at creating a resource description for a map or other type of cartographic material. And let's remember some key things about RDA. First, that it is a set of guidelines that has the user of our records in mind. And second, that its focus is on relationships rather than on formats of material. And finally, I think you'll agree once you've tried your hand at it that the leap from AACR2 to RDA is not really that great. I would like to acknowledge the assistance my colleague John Addig has given me in recent weeks to help me to better understand the terminology and the structure of RDA, the ideas behind FRBR, and more. My ALCTS crew of Diane Baden, Cindy Hepfer, and Yuan Lee, and behind-the-scenes help from Kate Harcourt and other members of the ALCTS RDA Planning and Training Task Force. And of course, thank you for attending today's presentation. Let me close with some selected resources related to RDA. And let me again point to Chris Oliver's book as a fantastic place to begin to grasp the many aspects of RDA and its founding principles. And I'm going to shamelessly plug a book that I am working on with my longtime mentor and colleague, Mary Larsgaard, which will be a how-to manual for cataloging cartographic materials using RDA at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to contact me with questions as you also begin working with creating records for cartographic resources using RDA. Many of you know I am always willing to assist in such matters. And finally, Diane, I understand you may have some questions for me to tackle.
Hello again, everyone. We have only a couple of questions that have been submitted thus far, and we'll start with those. But for the rest of you, please feel free to type your questions now into the question box. I want to thank Paige for giving us time to accept and answer these questions. So please submit them now, and we will start with the ones we've already received. So the first one, Paige, is there a period after the abbreviations for IN and FT? I assume that's inch and foot.
Correct. Yes, that would be. Yes. If you go to Appendix B, I believe it's B7 is a table for accepted abbreviations for words that we can use in our records. And those two in particular are in that table. So we can continue to use FT for foot or feet and IN period for inch or inches. And that's why I displayed it that way on a couple of the slides that I went through, because it's still allowed.
Thank you. The next question, can we add the 3XX fields in OCLC right now?
That is a great question. I have not attempted to do so myself, so I am not 100% sure that we can, but I'm pretty sure we are able to do that.
Actually, I know the answer to this one.
Diane, please help.
Because the RDA test libraries created RDA records in OCLC. And so, yes, the new mark fields that are required for RDA are all available in OCLC right now. The real issue is how your local system works with them, whether it's indexing them and how it's displaying them, but the fields are can be used in OCLC now. Next question, is there a good source for obtaining a natural scale indicator?
Oh, good question. Yes, there is. Let me provide two answers. One is that if you contact me directly, I happen to have a small number of those left. And I would be happy to mail them to you. And I am trying to look up elsewhere. Let me see really quickly here. Well, anyway, I know I have, oh, I'm in the wrong place. I'm in a workbook for when I teach my workshops on basic map cataloging, and I know I have that information. Here it is. If somebody wants to jot this down, whoever posed the question, you can contact Charles Conway at the Department of Geography, Memorial University of Newfoundland, St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. And the zip there is the letter A, number 1, letter B, number 3, X9. The person's name that I've worked with in the past escapes me at the moment, but I also can provide yet another source if you'll contact me directly.
Okay, can we still use et al?
Actually, yes. In RDA, in the discussion on the rule of three, there is an option at that rule which says if you wish to continue to use the rule of three, which would mean also using the mark of omission and the et al in square brackets, you may do so.
If RDA is international, will British catalogers be spelling color with a U and Americans spelling it C-O-L-O-R?
Yes, that's what I understand. That's part of the internationalization, is that each country within its language may now spell things the way that they're used to spelling them. So in AACR2, we're very used to seeing color spelled with the U in it, catalog with the U in it, that kind of thing. And RDA is going to allow us to Americanize those things for those of us who are in the United States.
Okay, this one's a little complex and you may have to go back to your screen.
Okay.
The example that says 62 by 59 centimeters folded to 22 by 10 centimeters.
Mm-hmm.
Why is there not a period after the first, but the second includes a period, e.g. the terms include the period, it is not a full stop. Shouldn't it be after both?
Let me go back to that slide really quickly if I can find it here. Diane, if you spot it,
you're going fast.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's not it.
I think it was one of your mark. I think it was the one where you were talking about the CM not requiring a period.
In the abbreviations, then, yeah, so that's further down. Let me see here.
I think
relationship, punctuation.
Later. Keep going. Physical description, perhaps. Here it comes.
Oh, I think, is it this one?
There you go.
I'm on it. Okay. Shall I put this back up on the screen so we can all look at it a little closer like that?
Perfect.
Okay. The question goes back to 62 by 59 cm period under the ARCR2 example, folded to 22 by 10. And then, as you can see in the RDA example here, the period no longer is a part of the CM. Going back to the fact that that's not an abbreviation, that it's a symbol. And yet, at the end of this line, this period at the end of the line represents the stop at the end of the particular string, and not the fact that CM is an abbreviation. I hope I answered that correctly.
Okay. This one you may or may not be able to answer. Are any ILS vendors that you know of interested in RDA?
Interested in? I think my general impression is that probably all of the vendors are interested in RDA. Whether they want to follow through and use it or not is a different story. And my experience with, for instance, vendors for discovery interfaces is that once one vendor gets started in a new area like that, the rest of them tend to follow fairly quickly.
Someone has written in the answer to the natural scale indicator question, Charles Conway, Department of Geography at Memorial University.
Right, Memorial University of Newfoundland.
Question about, is punctuation going to be optional in 245, 255, 260, and 300 fields? It might be ISBD punctuation that's being asked about. I'm not sure.
Right. It's my understanding that, as I stated in my presentation, RDA is not tied specifically to any given punctuation standard, and that goes back to the fact that it's intended to be extensible to other metadata schemas. And so at the local level, at least, if you want to move away from ISBD, I don't think there is any restriction on that. In thinking about all of us cooperatively cataloging in OCLC, that's a whole different matter. That's where the more closely everybody is following a particular standard, whether it's punctuation or something else, the better off it is for everybody involved. We're exchanging these records, and I would think that readability by using the ISBD standard along with the cooperative nature of OCLC, it would be wise to continue to use ISBD within the library community.
We have a clarification from someone at LC about the et al. Question.
Ah, good. Please share.
Which says, I believe that under RDA you can say and 3 others and 10 others, but not that you can use the Latin abbreviation et al. Okay. But the responder doesn't have RDA at hand to check that for sure.
And I do, but it would probably take me 5 minutes to find the specific rule. So if there's other questions, I am going to go ahead and see if I can find this.
Okay. It's good to have good people sitting in.
Yes, most definitely.
A question about whether RDA will change the 650, 651 fields regarding geographic places as subjects. 651 golden with the abbreviation in parens for Colorado, or the 650 geology-Colorado-golden.
Right. No, actually that for the time being remains the same. That is an area that is not fully developed in RDA at this point in time, so I'm very interested to see if there will be impact on abbreviating place names any differently than what we are doing today. And as a matter of fact, I believe it is the table B11 in Appendix B that also comes from Appendix B in AACR2. This specifies how to appropriately abbreviate places such as our states, provinces in Canada, that kind of thing. So there won't be any change in that particular area right now.
Okay, someone asked if you would review the core if elements again.
Okay, in what context?
I
Generally
think
speaking,
we have to guess.
Let me see if I can find the core if slide very quickly here. There it is. Instruction 1.3. If we go into RDA and begin looking at the various instructions associated with the different areas that you want to go and find information for instance, title comes to mind immediately, and that one I believe is 2.3. Immediately under that header for title, it specifically says that this is a core element, and that means that as a cataloger, at a minimum, you have to provide a title proper for the resource you're describing. I'm currently on 1.3 for core elements in RDA, and it says when describing a manifestation or item, include as a minimum all the elements listed below that are applicable and readily ascertainable. And then it provides a list of these, and it goes from title, statement of responsibility, addition statement, so on and so forth. So there's a specific set of areas in the bib record where we must follow the core element designation, and then in each one of these, if there is other kinds of the same thing, for instance, there are multiple kinds of titles, you can also supply those additional elements, and those are known as the core if elements. Something to get used to, although You know, truly, if you're already cataloging at a full level, it's something that comes very naturally, and 90% of the time or more, you're already doing that. So it's not something that should be a distraction.
A more general question got asked, does RDA supplement AACR2, or is it being developed to replace it?
I think the answer to that is no to both of them. I know it's not a supplement to AACR2. AACR2 is a totally separate content standard, and RDA has come along. Originally was intended, kind of came out of a process of several years ago in which a group was looking at taking AACR2 and making an AACR3, and finally came to the realization that that process was not working. So RDA kind of evolved out of that and is based on the functional requirements principles. I hope I've answered that question well enough. The question of whether you are to use RDA is entirely up to where you're at, your institution. And I can say that my institution has already made the decision that we will move to RDA when January 2013 rolls around, as long as that deadline or that timeline doesn't slip.
Here are two related questions. One asks, what is an example of a map that could be cataloged at the work level, and how would this be done? How does this differ from an expression and manifestation and item cataloging record for the map? And then the follow-up question was, will most map cataloging records be at the manifestation level?
Oh, let me take the easy side first. Yes, most of what we're doing with cataloging maps is identifying manifestation level, the manifestation entity level information. Let me pop up the slide that shows the various. Is that the one? I think one more to go here. Yes. So for instance, I cannot off the top of my head come up with a distinct, give me a map that's a work. In my mind, a work is something that's not tangible, and that's probably not an accurate way of describing it. But I think it's when you get to the expression level that any resource that you're describing is a tangible item. It's something that's in front of your desk or on your desk that you're actually working with. The expression and work levels of these entities really do apply more to specific elements or areas of the bibliographic record. For instance, in this particular slide, if you look at the 710, the United States Department of State, that is, as far as we know, because there's no indication of individuals involved in the idea of and or creating an expression of this map of the Arabian Peninsula, that is considered a work entity. As far as an expression level entity, when you move to an actual item, if you look at the 336 field that specifies that what you have is a cartographic image, that becomes an expression because it is one form of the work of Arabian Peninsula petroleum concessions, oil fields, and installations. It's known that once you have an expression, that a work becomes or can move from one expression to another. The examples I've seen are things like from hard copy of a particular resource into perhaps an audio or a video version, something like that. But the manifestation level is most of the work that we're doing. We're taking information from the given cartographic resource and placing it in the record in its given fields, and that transcription of information is definitely at the manifestation level.
There was an additional question about this slide and about the 250 edition statement, whether that's an expression or manifestation element.
That one was also fuzzy to me, and when I had a discussion with John Attic about it a couple of days ago, I had actually thought that it was an expression entity, because it does seem like that it might be another edition. In fact, since this is called, it comes from the map itself, and the information says first revised 1957 there. That implies that, of course, there was a first edition before that, and so it's my understanding that because this is a revised edition, it's a manifestation entity. If this had been a first edition, then it would have been at the expression level.
Okay, we're running out of time and the questions are continuing to come in, so I'll try to squeeze in one or two more before we close. What would be the 3.3x fields for raised relief maps?
Well, let's go to the table and figure that one out on our own. Find those.
And while you're doing that, I just want to remind people who are afraid they missed something that you're going to receive both the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint with Paige's notes. So if anything went by too fast, you will have it to consult again, and that includes Paige's email address where, as I recall, he welcomed your questions.
Yes, I did.
Okay, back to answering this question.
Okay, so we're looking at a raised relief, one of those plastic raised relief maps, and we need to insert in our 3.3x fields the appropriate labels, if you will, for that particular thing. In this table for the 3.3x or 336 field for content type, I believe that it would be a cartographic tactile image because it's something, well, no, actually, let me back up for a second. Below it is the cartographic three-dimensional form. If it's laying on the table, that was created to show elevations and stuff in a three-dimensional form. So I think it's the cartographic three-dimensional form for this particular field. If we move on to the media type, it would be unmediated because we don't need to have any kind of equipment to view or see the information involved. And then if we go to the carrier type, it would be an object. Now, that said, I'm not 100% sure that that's an accurate answer, and I have not tried my hand at creating these 3.3x fields for much of anything, actually sheet maps and I think globes a couple times. So this is still very new to me as well.
Okay, we did have a couple of people write in about the et al, and it sounds like we do not use et al.
Okay.
Paul Frank from LC, I believe, has sent you a message about this. So what I want to say to everyone, because we're running out of time and there are still some questions, is that Paige will get the transcript of all your questions, and those that did not get answered or those where he feels like he would like to elaborate, he'll answer those and we'll send that out to you separately as a document with questions and answers. If that's okay with you, Paige.
That is fine with me, yes.
Because we do have several more questions and we are pretty much near the end. So I'm going to ask for the presentation rights back so I can just wrap up this really wonderful webinar. Okay. A couple of things. First of all, huge thanks to Paige for helping us understand the differences between AACR2 and RDA for cartographic materials. We have 3 more webinars in the fall RDA series coming up, and here are the dates and topics and presenters. And remember that if you register for more than one, there is special pricing. In addition, we encourage you to check the ALCTS website for upcoming events, webinars, e-forums, and courses. And we absolutely welcome your suggestions for new webinars. There's a form on the website where you can submit a proposal for new webinars. Before we sign off, I would like to give special thanks to Yuan Lee, who provided technical support for today's webinar. We appreciate your attendance. We thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to sharing other topics with you in the future. Have a good day.